Sandra Bullock offering her first-class seat to the elderly veteran. She stood and said, "This seat is yours, you've earned it." Without waiting for a response, she gracefully made her way to the back, leaving the first-class seat behind. Sandra Bullock, a young woman in first class, sat quietly, blending in with the other passengers. She looked calm and composed, but there was a sense of humility in the way she carried herself. The elderly veteran, in his late 70s, entered economy class slowly. He wore a military jacket with faded patches and medals, showing his past service. His movements were careful, and his thoughtful gaze hinted at a life filled with sacrifice and experience. Sandra Bullock's unexpected gesture caught everyone by surprise. As the commotion continued in economy class, Sandra sat in her seat, quietly watching the situation unfold. The elderly veteran's discomfort was clear, and she could sense he was in need of help. Without hesitating, Sandra pressed the call button for the flight attendant. When the attendant arrived, Sandra spoke softly but firmly, "Can I switch seats with the gentleman in the military jacket?" Her voice was calm, but her words showed genuine concern for the veteran. She wasn't looking for attention or praise, her offer was sincere, driven by a desire to show respect and kindness to someone who had served his country. Sandra's demeanor remained humble, as if helping the veteran was the most natural thing to do. It wasn't about the luxury of a first-class seat, it was about acknowledging the veteran's service and offering him something that would make him more comfortable. As Sandra stood up from her seat, the atmosphere in first class shifted. The passengers, who had been enjoying their comfortable positions, looked up in surprise. Whispers began to ripple across the cabin, with people exchanging curious glances. Some couldn't believe what they were seeing, while others simply watched in awe as Sandra made her way toward the back of the plane. The flight attendants, too, were surprised by the request. It wasn't every day that someone voluntarily gave up a first-class seat, especially not a young woman like Sandra. They had seen many passengers make demands, but this was something entirely different. Sandra's offer wasn't made for recognition, it was a quiet act of kindness that seemed to leave everyone around her unsure of what to say. Passengers in first class continued to whisper, some questioning why Sandra would do such a thing. One woman across the aisle leaned toward Sandra and said, "You don't have to do that, you know. You paid for this seat." But Sandra simply smiled and shrugged. "Some people deserve it more," she replied. As she walked toward the rear of the plane, the murmurs grew louder. The passengers watched in disbelief, some pulling out their phones to capture the moment. Sandra seemed unaffected by the attention, her focus entirely on the veteran and the seat he needed. It was clear that her simple act of kindness was about to change the mood of the entire flight. The veteran, at first, hesitated when Sandra offered him her seat. He looked at her with a mix of surprise and gratitude, unsure if he should accept such a kind gesture. But after a moment of thought, he smiled softly and nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of emotion. He knew he could never have expected something like this, especially from someone so young. As he walked to the front of the plane to take Sandra's seat, he felt a deep sense of appreciation. The veteran was still overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Once he settled into the comfort of the first-class seat, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the gesture sink in. It wasn't just about the seat, it was about the recognition and respect that Sandra had shown him, a respect he hadn't experienced in a long time. As the veteran relaxed in the plush seat, his mind drifted back to another time, a time many years ago when he had been in a much darker place. He had been struggling after serving in the military, lost and without much hope. It had been a difficult period in his life, and he felt alone, without a place to call home. He remembered one particular moment when things seemed their hardest. He had been in New York, unsure of his next steps, when he met a man outside a diner. The man had noticed the veteran's struggle and, without hesitation, approached him. It was none other than Fred Trump, Sandra's grandfather. The veteran shared how Fred Trump had gone out of his way to help him, offering a roof over his head and a job to help him get back on his feet. The kindness Fred Trump showed him was more than just a simple favor, it was life-changing. "He didn't owe me anything," the veteran would often say. "But he helped me when I had nothing." Now, sitting in first class, the veteran couldn't help but think about the connection between Fred Trump's generosity and Sandra's own kindness. It was a full-circle moment that left him feeling deeply moved. He looked around at the other passengers and couldn't help but feel grateful for the unexpected kindness that had come into his life again, this time from Sandra. Sandra's gesture had a profound impact, creating a ripple effect throughout the cabin. As the veteran's story spread, passengers began to reflect on the power of small acts of kindness. They started to realize that even the simplest gesture could have a deep and lasting impact on someone's life. People began sharing their own stories of gratitude and service, recalling times when a kind word or small action had made a big difference in their lives. Some spoke of how a simple thank you from a stranger had brightened their day, while others shared memories of how someone's kindness had helped them through difficult times. The atmosphere on the plane shifted. What had started as a routine flight was now a deeply moving experience. Passengers who had been strangers just hours before were now connecting over shared human experiences of kindness, respect, and empathy. It was as if everyone on the flight had been touched by the same wave of generosity, bringing them closer together. Some passengers who had never spoken to each other before were now in conversation, exchanging their thoughts on how important it was to be kind and give back to others. As the story of the veteran's past began to spread, a surprising connection emerged. The veteran explained how Fred Trump, Sandra's grandfather, had once helped him during a difficult time. He shared how Fred had offered him a place to stay and a job when he had nothing, a kindness that had changed the course of his life. This revelation took everyone by surprise. Sandra's family, particularly her grandfather Fred, had played an important role in the veteran's life many years ago. Now, Sandra, a young woman in first class, had unknowingly followed in his footsteps, offering a simple but powerful act of kindness to the same man. The passengers were deeply moved by the connection. It was incredible to think that 2 generations of the same family had made such an impact on the life of one person. The serendipity of the situation, how the veteran had been helped by Fred Trump all those years ago, and how Sandra had stepped in to offer her seat to the same man, was not lost on anyone. It seemed like fate had brought them together in a way that no one could have predicted. As the plane began its descent into Newark, the atmosphere in the cabin was filled with a quiet sense of gratitude. The veteran, who had been deeply touched by Sandra's kind gesture, made his way to the economy section to thank her personally. His eyes were filled with appreciation as he walked down the aisle, determined to express his thanks. When he reached Sandra's seat, she looked up in surprise, not expecting such a gesture from him. "Excuse me, young lady," the veteran said gently, his voice filled with emotion. "I just wanted to thank you face to face for what you did today. What you did meant more to me than you know." He paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "You and your family have shown me kindness when I needed it most, and that's something I'll never forget." Sandra, touched by his words, smiled warmly. "It was the least I could do. You've given so much to this country." "The least I could offer was my seat," she replied, her voice sincere. The veteran's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. "Your family has a history of kindness, and today you reminded me of that. Thank you again, from the bottom of my heart." As the plane touched down and passengers began to disembark, many of them stopped to thank Sandra for her generosity. Some shook her hand, others simply gave her a nod of appreciation, recognizing the quiet strength of her character. It was clear that her simple act had left a lasting impact on everyone who had witnessed it. The veteran, too, reflected on the journey and how it had changed him. As he prepared to leave the plane, he looked around at the passengers who had shared this moment with him, and he realized how small acts of kindness could shape the world in ways that were sometimes hard to measure. He thought about how the kindness he had received from Fred Trump years ago had helped him rebuild his life, and how Sandra's gesture had once again reminded him of the power of empathy and giving. Before leaving the plane, the veteran tipped his hat to Sandra and said softly, "Don't ever forget, these moments matter." Sandra nodded, a quiet smile on her face, knowing that what had started as a small gesture had truly made a difference. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Sometimes, it's the small acts of kindness that make the biggest impact. Let's remind the world that kindness still matters and that even the smallest gestures can change lives. Whether it's helping a stranger, offering a seat, or simply showing empathy, these actions can create a ripple effect of positivity. So, spread the love and encourage others to do the same. Together, we can make the world a kinder place for everyone.